is foul and foul is fair. Hover through the fog and filthy
Hi there folks, Laurel here. I wanted to do a video response to Divinity's video Legalize and Regulate No, which I'll link to in the low bar. Before I get started, anything that I say in this video is just reflecting my own opinions. I'm not representing Amy nor anyone else. And two, this video is not scripted, so if it's rambly or I repeat myself, my apologies. I will be probably repeating a couple of things that I've stated in other videos, but I think they're worth repeating. So first off, I think that there is a misconception when people hear decriminalization that they think that people who support decriminalization are against any type of regulation whatsoever. For myself, this is definitely not the case. I think that any industry needs at least some sort of basic rules, guidelines, and regulations. What I am against is new criminal laws being implemented in regards to sex work. And that's how I see legalization. There is one criminal or one law that I would not be opposed to being put into the Canadian Criminal Code, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. What I am for is decriminalization, so the complete removal of the laws for consenting adult sex work. We already have other laws in place, like public acts of indecency, exploitation, rape, battery, murder, threats. We have laws already that are against these kind of things, and I don't think sex work needs a whole slew of new laws to cover these things. It's redundant. These other laws can be implemented, so I don't think we need that. What I am for is, again, decriminalization of consenting adult sex work and it being seen as a legitimate industry, including the brothel owners, all the workers, all the support staff, and the clients. I think that they should be seen as legitimate business people, employees, and customers. Within legalization, what you see often is that it's not treated as a legitimate industry. The workers are seen as a vice, like they are a bottle of alcohol or tobacco. They're people. So they're not objects. And I think with the legitimizing of this industry, we need to move away from that whole mentality that the people who work within the industry are somehow objects. I think that's a huge problem to begin with. People who are prohibitionists state that sex workers are seen as objects, and I think legalization also treats sex workers as objects in many different ways, as opposed to real live human beings. So yeah, okay, with that said, that's basically where I stand. I am for regulation though, and I think that government, the federal government, can play a role in overseeing the industry without additional criminal laws. They can oversee the taxation, they can oversee health and safety, they can oversee workers' rights, and probably a couple of other things. On top of that, I think most industries have some sort of autonomous self-governing body. And I think that the sex industry should have something like that as well. And regional governments, municipalities and such make bylaws up for their particular region, and I'm not opposed to that either. In regards to outdoor sex work or street level sex work, I think that there's a whole bunch of different issues that intersect under that whole topic. Things like poverty, mental health issues, addictions, housing, And I don't think any kind of legislation will be able to fix all those things. They're deep societal issues that need to be tackled one-on-one. With that said, I am for the decriminalization of solicitation outdoors. So that would be advertisement of sex work outdoors. I am not for business being conducted outdoors or in a public place. I think that that should be done in private. We already have a law in place, like such as acts of public indecency, which a client and a sex worker could be charged with if they were, say, having a blowjob in a park for money. I don't think we need a whole new slew of laws for that particular issue. So I am for public advertisement, and as far as moving things indoors, I think that there are some things that we can do to encourage to move sex workers indoors, such as perhaps portable brothels, brothels maybe in a trailer, communal brothels. Again, I don't think that that will move everyone indoors. I mean, that there is a whole bunch of problems that need to be addressed before I think we see the complete end of sex work happening in private. As far as zoning goes, I am completely against red light districts. I think that they do more harm than good, so I don't support them. What I do support, though, is what you see in New South Wales, Australia, is sex workers are allowed to solicit, so they're allowed to advertise their business outside of a certain distance of a place of worship, a school, a hospital, or a residence, and that I support. Taxation. Yeah, I think another misconception that people have when they hear decriminalization is that those of us who support decriminalization are completely against any type of taxation, which is definitely not the case. What I support is sex workers paying fair income tax or business tax if they're their own business owner. That's how employees and business people pay taxes here in Canada, is based on income, and I don't think that a sex worker or an employee should have to pay additional taxes on top of that, just because of the type of industry they work in. I think that if we were to have a sin tax, I definitely don't think that the employee should have to pay for it. And an example of this would be alcohol. It has a sin tax on it here in Canada. So when you go to your local pub for a pint of beer and the bartender gives you that pint of beer, that person who's serving you is probably an employee, and they're not paying the sin tax on it. The customer and the business owner is paying that sin tax. So in that kind of situation, if the sex industry were to have some type of sin tax on it, I think that the employees shouldn't have to pay for it. What you do see, well, in somewhere like Amsterdam, what has happened historically, at least, is the sex worker, if they were working legally, would pay 50% of their earnings to the brothel, and then they would pay a 25% sin tax to the government, and so what they were going home with was 25% of the money they earned, which is completely unfair. Now, if everyone was being taxed that way, then, fine, but, to be taxed just because you are a sex worker based on the industry you work in as opposed to income, to me, is completely unfair. So yeah, I am for taxation, but I don't think that employees should have to pay a sin tax. One final thing that I wanted to touch on was health and safety. And I had mentioned earlier that there would be one law that I wouldn't be opposed to being implemented into the Canadian Criminal Code, and that would be mandatory condom use for both clients and sex workers. In New Zealand, this is the one aspect of legalization that's happened, and as far as I know, condom use hasn't really increased for sex workers in New Zealand. Like, most of them were using condoms prior to that. But there is one situation I had heard about where a client had removed a condom in the middle of a sex act with a sex worker, and he was criminally charged. So I don't think that this is a bad law to have on the books. I think that it can be beneficial. Plus, there are certain types of industries that I think where people can be criminally charged if they're not using safety precautions, the mandatory safety precautions already, say in like a tattoo parlor or in a doctor's office or a dentist office. So if that is the case, I don't see why it should be different for sex workers. Like, I am not for sex workers or the sex industry getting special rights. I'm for them having equal rights. So if there is an industry that has, a similar industry that has specific health and safety standards, I don't think that sex work or the sex industry should somehow escape those similar health and safety standards. As far as mandatory STI checks, my biggest issue with it in how it's been done so far is that only sex workers are getting tested, and at best this only takes care of half the problem. I think that also, for this to be fair and equitable, that clients should be tested as well and provide some sort of certificate proving that they are quote unquote clean, if that's going to be a standard that sex workers are held up to. This could be a potential bureaucratic nightmare, but I think that if, like how I would picture a above board brothel operating would be, getting proper documentation and ID from a client anyways to prove their age, and some sort of waiver for them to fill out, stating that they are legally capable of consenting and such. So I don't see why providing a certificate showing that they are, free of STIs to someone before they go see a sex worker is a bad thing. So I think that's the only way I would accept mandatory STI checks, is if both clients and sex workers were held to a similar standard. That way, you can kind of combat or curtail the spread of the potential spread of diseases, as well as sex workers, if they are found to have an STI, they potentially will lose their livelihood. So I mean, they have, not only are they at risk of catching something, they're at risk of losing their income. And as far as brothels and other places where sex work might be conducted, I think that those places should be held to a certain standard of health and safety, and I think that they should be checked regularly by, say, like a health unit or something, to make sure that those standards are being met. I think that's it for now. If you have any comments, feel free to leave them. If I've gotten something incorrect in this video, please feel free to correct me. I welcome comments, private messages, or video responses. And thank you so much for listening. Sláinte.